Just do the quick bit for the YouTube video people. Welcome to this Organic Growers Alliance webinar on sustainable farming incentive through the lens of small to medium scale organic horticulture. And first up, Maria, who are you and where are you?
Hiya, my name's Maria. I'm based at Tolhurst Organic. I'm the head grower and one of the directors. We're a 19-acre horticulture business. It consists of a walled garden and about 17 acres of field scale. We run agroforestry alongside a sort of more beetle bank, separated field. So we've got two or three main growing areas. We've been growing on this site for 40 years, and I've been working there for four now. Um, so hello everybody. I hope that you sort of see a lot of similarities between sort of what we're doing and how we're applying for our SFI and how you can apply it to your systems wherever you're based.
Great stuff, thank you. And so Tolhurst Organic goes through the SFI process, don't you? And you have put successful applications in previously.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a countryside stewardship agreement. We've got an SFI agreement. I think Jerry will take you through some of the differences between that. And we've been receiving payments since 2022, so perhaps later than some, but also not so late to the game that we're not benefiting from it at the moment. And it means that we've got two agreements which are slightly staggered, so we've got a bit of time to be able to organise one agreement, get that out the way, because winter's short and life is busy on the farm. So yeah, I don't know, maybe we can talk about this a little bit more when after Jerry's slides about how we practically go about doing the application and making it work around farm life. Um,
Perfect. Thank you. And Jim.
Oh, hello. I'm Jim Aplin. Me and my partner Hayley have been growers since 2000. We're now on our third site. We moved here in 21, 22, just outside Pershore. We've got a very secure tenancy here, effectively for as long as we want it, and potentially can pass it on. We're small scale growers. It's got 2.5 hectares of horticulture, mixed veg, very little protected cropping. One 16 metres by 24 metres Keda greenhouse. And we do cut flowers, dried flowers as well, and plants for gardeners and allotment holders for extra cash holders, extra cash flow. It's almost all through direct sales. Haven't done any wholesale for the last 2 or 3 years. And the vast majority of that is through Stroud Farmers Market, which is about 30 miles away, but from a sort of accident of history is where we started growing and first built up a market. That's a strong local community link. We don't employ anybody at the moment, but now we've settled into how the business changes on our new facilities. It's getting to be an urgent issue that we have to employ just to have some time off. Although it's only 2.5 hectares horticulture, the site we moved on to is a total of 17 hectares, with the bulk of it in share farming with a local organic farmer. So we were already claiming basic payment and countryside stewardship, just the organic options at mid-tier. So I was used to it, and through involvement with the OGA and also helping a little bit with the soil association, with talking with civil servants and my landlord before, local farmer with share farming with here, and he was our landlord, Adrian Steele. So was talking quite a lot what was on the way after Brexit. And I had heard there was some potentially good options that, although they wouldn't all be labelled organic, on the way for organic farmers. And it's worked out quite a lucky fit for us. We're getting about 3 times as much now through 2 SFI agreements as we were from the basic payment and countryside stewardship. There was some luck, and I think a couple of doing things right, of actually reacting and looking at it. And the first thing was being actually close to the organic organisations, and went to a meeting the Soil Association through Future Farm Resilience put on, and started hearing about this legume fallow payments and looking at it carefully, and then started looking at it and thinking, oh, after thinking we'll get nothing as usual for horticulture, there's 600 quid a hectare for growing fertility, something we normally wouldn't get any cash out of. And then it later came in the specifically organic £700 a hectare. And I think picking up fairly early what was going on made me be quick off the mark to get it. And I got an extra kick in the backside to do that. We put in for a grant for hedge laying here, and was just, all I had to do was send the map in to get it approved. But I thought, oh, there's no hurry, it's basically approved. And then they closed the countryside stewardship capital schemes. And yeah, I was pretty furious with that. But it made sure that when SFI came, and I'd seen the type of payments we could potentially get, I got one agreement in very quickly for share farming, the legume fallows. This was where it was very lucky for us. The whole of the share farming was just going into a 3-year lay anyway, and the cropping hadn't been good for a couple of years. The weather was really against it. And suddenly, instead of thinking, oh, there's nothing coming in, there was 590, I think, a hectare, which has gone down slightly on the legume fallows. Just getting that option and the hedgerows in on the first claim meant I was already getting a fair bit more than we were getting under basic payment. I found it an easy scheme to operate. I think compared to other paperwork I've had to do in recent years, it's been a doddle. It hasn't, not a hostile atmosphere, but having to deal with planning authorities and for social care and housing for family people, and it's an absolute doddle compared to issues like that doing this. And certainly anybody who's ever had to claim tax credits, it's easier than that. I'm not trying to be too much of a salesman for SFI, but I've also found that the promise they made that it wouldn't be punitive if you didn't comply fully with it, it's been borne out in practice. As last year we had a perfect storm of problems to go with the drought, as well as being an area of the country that we missed every little bit of rain going all summer. After ploughing in April, PTO was down on the tractor, power harrowing, just as it was starting to bake on heavy soil. It took a month to get that fixed. It was partly my fault for not sorting it, but we're under pressure with family issues, all to do with social care. And then I ended up with having emergency eye surgery in September, and it's just non-stop perfect storm all year. And I just couldn't get down the 2.4 hectares I've got in the agreement. Contacted RPA about that. So I've got just under 2 hectares established. And they said, well, for those reasons, would you like to reduce it to next year? But we see no reason not to pay you for the full 2.4 hectares, which I was really surprised about. I was hoping they'd pay for the, I think it was 1.9, and accept me reasons. But I said, no, it's good enough reason. You can have the whole lot. And they didn't really put me through the hoop on it. And to meet the record keeping that they ask of it, there isn't nothing wasn't already keeping with organic records and financial records, apart from taking a few photos from time to time, which I am really bad at doing anyway. And just for belt and braces, start trying to properly do a farm diary of what's going on, which normally breaks down in May for us. So it has worked really well for us, and found the key ones, if you are looking at it, is the fertility, if you've got whole fields in breaks, and the organic horticulture. They made up about 75–80% of what we are getting from just those two. But with the hedgerows that have now gone, all the little bits you can stack on, looks like, oh, it's just £100 for this, £100 for that. And then before you realise it, what seems like small amounts of money, put another couple of thousand on a year. And for quarterly cash flow, we've had no late payment problems at all. It's been there on the button every time. And it's a lot better deal than I ever hoped for, really, with what was coming. I thought we'd get nothing, and was surprised when it came. And the only other thing I'd say is that it's without doing anything different from what we planned to do anyway. One little tweak, the seed mix we used for establishing the clover lays was a bit more diverse to make sure it met the requirements of the legume fallow. That did make it a more expensive mix. And as we just spent a lot of money, I would probably have gone for a very basic red clover, white clover, a grass or two that wouldn't have qualified for it if I hadn't been aware of that. It's also much better practice, I think, that mixed, much more diverse lay that I put in, and it's a mix from Cotswold seeds. Before I ordered it, I saw it on Adrian Steele's farm. He was already growing it there, and just how productive and diverse it was. So in that way, I reckon it's actually improved what we're doing already. I thought, don't really want to, but I'll spend the extra money now on the better seed mix. And I think the compliance and rotational options that you have to fill out annually has also had a marginal good effect on decision making I'm making. When I stop the hectic day-to-day work to consider exactly what I'll be doing over the next year and reassess plans, not so much for just how they'll fit the subsidy payments, but for what I want to be doing and how they're going to fit them. It's a useful push in the right direction. So the main thing I would suggest from my experience is not hang around. There's this window in Met opening soon. I'd be very surprised if the money ran out before September, as the big boys are being kept up. But even with the cap, I think they'll be hoovering up everything they can. They've probably changed financial structures and split farms into business organisations to maximise what they can take. So I wouldn't let it drift into when the window closes, because they'll be on the ball. And stay in touch with our organisations, the organic bodies and the OGA, because there is advice and experience there. And as well as learning from what other people are doing in local grower groups, you pick up ideas and think, yeah, that'd be helpful as well. So yeah, stay close to the organic movement, I'd say.
Brilliant, thanks, Jim. And on that thing on the window, there was, as I say, the RPA and DEFRA had a webinar this morning, and a few of us were on that. Adrian Steele was on it as well, and we didn't get an awful lot of information, but one of the things that they were trying to get across was there is not a big pot of money, and they will be tight in pulling that window of opportunity. Quite how that plays out, I don't know. Judging from Jim's experience, And from my experience of working with these civil servants over many years, they want to help, but there's only so much they can do if they haven't got ministerial write-off on a budget. So we just have to see how it goes. But yeah, thanks, Jim. After Jerry's going to do some slides and Maria can give us a bit more in depth on the experience at Tolly's. So over to Jerry now. Jerry Alford will be speaking specifically about the SFI. Jerry's been doing this, I hope you don't mind me saying, Jerry, for quite a while. And thank goodness, because we've got somebody who is a farmer, has been a farmer, and works with others and can look at this, look at what the civil servants say, and try and translate that into something useful. Over to you, Jerry.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for the invitation opportunity. Introduce myself. I'm Jerry Alford. I'm Senior Farming Advisor at the Soil Association. I work in the farming and land use team, so I don't work involved. I'm not involved with the certification side. Very much just an advisor. We are part of the advisory team. You're probably aware of the Soil Association structure. Just so that Parity is a separate entity to certification, the Land Trust and Exchange. So I'm allowed to give advice, whereas certification officers, as you know, are not allowed to give advice. They can just tell you what the standards say. What we're going to look at today, this morning, and there's quite a few slides, a lot of details. Stephen has a copy of this as a PDF, and as this is also being recorded, so it does allow us you to look at it, so you can just listen rather than having to make copious notes. It'll all be available to you if you wish to. So we're just going to look at the headlines of what SFI 26 is bringing. I'm going to talk a little bit about the June application. Can we look at some of the options that are most relevant for you as small and medium-sized growers, rather than the sort of arable orientation that it tends to be. And then we're just going to look at some capital grants and other grants that are available in the next step for you going forward. For the headline details on SFI 26. So this is the one that's open for this year. Payment is capped at 100,000 per farm per agreement per year, which means that you potentially can apply, if you're of that scale, apply for another agreement up to 100,000 next year and the following year, so it can keep on going. So it's not as big as it could have been, and it's probably more than it might have been. So move it on that. Compared with last year, when there were over 100 options, there are only 71 options available this year. And what has been done is from previous schemes, they have taken away what they consider to be duplicates. Some of that was some of the organic practice orientated. So there were some specific organic ones which were also available to non-organic farmers, or some dead weight options, which what they considered dead weights of those who had previous agreements. There was a management payments, there were payments for hedge assessment, there were payments for soil assessments, and also 2 reports. So they've been removed. So it is very much now down to actions that you get to provide public goods by getting public money. So rather than a subsidy, you are being paid to do something on all of these actions now. Compared with last year's agreement, payment rates have been reduced on 3 of the options, one of which I'll talk about in a minute, but there's no change. If you're in an existing scheme, the payment rate remains the same. So the herbal lay option, for example, has had a reduced payment, but if you've got one on an existing agreement, you will get that higher payment still. Some rates, not that we're going to talk about today, because they're largely on the moorland, the payment rates have been increased, and the higher rate will be paid on existing agreements, so that those were considered to be underpaid. In the SFI 26, all of the options we'll be talking about will be 3-year options, except the organic conversion option. And if organic conversion is something you are considering, I'll talk about the funding in a second, but you will have to reapply for an SFI in 2 years' time to get organic management payments. It's, I think, something we're trying to pressurize them to adapt to make it a 2+1, because it's a bit illogical otherwise. There will be, as Stephen has mentioned, 2 application windows for SFI 26. but we are still waiting for a certain amount of detail. So we're looking for exact detail on what the guidelines are, and everything I'm going to say to you this evening is based around what the SFI 25 guidelines and guidance were. If they change, we will obviously keep people informed as we know what change is taking place. One area of big concern for a lot of people is that many have got countryside stewardship schemes ending in December. Nearly every organic farmer has a mid-tier or a CS scheme, because that's where the organic management payments were made available to them. And we have that situation where they had allowed a rollover last December, so that we have, and then to finish in December. We have people whose agreements were due to finish in December this year. And we also have people who went into the very first SFI, which is 2024, which is also ending in December. So there are a large number of people who don't yet know what the opportunities will be, and we don't know what the opportunities yet are. Hopefully that should be informed later on. We have to make presumptions, but even those people who have existing CS schemes would finish may well be able to get some interim cover by using an SFI 26, because they will have land that hasn't got options which are now available to them. So it's not a question, oh, you can't apply. Besides stewardship, higher tier is the highest level. It's replacing the old higher tier scheme, it's opening to more farms. And if you are looking at a CSHT, many of the actions that we're talking about tonight are not available in that. So it is expected you will have a higher tier agreement in 2026 and an SFI as well. And the organic management payments, for example, will be in the SFI rather than the higher tier. One other thing to be wary of for 2027, when we have a new scheme coming, is there was certainly mentioned in the land use framework reporting that there may well be regional options or restrictions, so that they will try to support certain actions in certain areas. And there has been some talk about catchment sensitive stuff as well. So maybe in some areas that certain options will be not available, or maybe there will be specific options available. But this is in 27. At the moment, we're only looking at 26. So if you've got the opportunity, I would go for it, as Jim said, rather than hanging on to wait to see what comes. For those who are considering an application, the eligibility for a June application is for small farms between 3 hectares and 50, with or without an existing revenue agreement. So if you are under 50 hectares and you have an existing scheme, you will still be allowed to apply for this one. Now, the 3 hectare rule is really frustrating because, as you will all be aware, last year it was 5 hectares and above. Then they changed that and reduced it to anybody could apply, and now they've brought back that 3 hectare rule again. So again, it's something that we are extremely frustrated about, but afraid we haven't yet managed to get any change in that thought process. Any farm of any size without an existing agreement can also apply in this June application window. So there is some risk that some of the big guys will be coming in and claiming chunks of the money. So don't message all the way through this is get your heads around what this is so that you can put an application in quickly when it's possible. In order to apply, you will need an SBI number. And in order to stop that change that Jim alluded to of people restructuring businesses, you would need to have had that business registered with the RPA by the 1st of January 2026 to be eligible to apply. Any other farm, anyone with an existing agreement, anyone who's bigger, will have to join in the big pot in September to try and get in before the money runs out. What the government has been saying is there will be a pot of money available in June, and they will keep a running total of how much money is left, what percentage of the money is left available, so that people who are still trying to deal with last minute bits and pieces will know what's happening. But again, our advice is work out what it is you want to apply for or will want to apply for, and as soon as the window opens, do put an application in. Even if it hasn't got everything you want to do, get an application in to make sure you get something going. One of the questions that often comes up is this overlapping with other schemes. So SFI 26 can be claimed on land in a mid-tier schemes, but you can't be paid for the same action twice. So if, for example, you have a parcel of land which you have just got organic conversion management payment on, you can layer on top of that some of the SFI options. If you have land that hasn't got any payments on it, obviously that's fine. And so what you'll see on the guidance on the Find Funding for Land of Farms web page, which is there, each of the options has a little box like the one on the right hand side. That shows you where you can overlap actions. So in the case of the action this one relates to, if you have a CF agreement and you have the OR3, OR4 or the organic conversion payments, so if you've got the option HS9, for example, on a patch of land, you can still play for SFI 26 on top of that option. So there is some flexibility. However, there are no SFI possible on people with existing higher level schemes, because they were basically farm specific and they were written with the intention that you wouldn't be needing additional income. So in 2026, there are 71 options available. I'm not going to run through all of these. The relevant ones here for us are really the 11 organic conversion and management payment ones. There are arable and horticulture options, including some for IPM, and a few of the boundary agroforestry buffer strip options, which ones are likely to be possible relevant to your scheme. So we probably are all aware that SFI mid-tier has always been a route to get funding for organic conversion. Payment rates are the remaining very much the same as they have for the last few years. And equally, the payment is here for the management options. And as you can see, as Jim mentioned, £707 for organic horticultural land management is a very useful sum, particularly on smaller scale farms. If you are organically certified, it will cover the cost of certification. So it is a very useful income stream for that. The top fruit payment is a very good payment. There are two specific conditions related to it that we need to be aware of. First off is it has to be for commercial orchards, the ones that have some form of sale. So anybody who is selling apples through box schemes, selling them through farm shops, producing juice which they're selling, that would count as commercial, but it cannot be used for commercial cider production. So Messrs. Bulmers and all the others cannot put their fields or their vineyards into the top fruit option. Then does also apply for top fruit credits and vineyards. So you can't have vineyards in organic conversion or management because they're being used for alcohol production. So it's one of the EU rules that affects that. However, if you have a small amount of orchard on your farm that you are finding a commercial use for, it is possibly something to consider because obviously the payment rate is very, very high. One of the significant points that we need to bear in mind here is the way that we can stack or layer the options, okay? And it's a very useful way to list just the organic conversion at 707, organic management, sorry, at 707 is a really nice payment. However, there are other opportunities, as Jim was mentioning, the way that you can build and increase this payment rate. Some of you may know if this is a picture of this of the Apricot Centre, just to be able to get a picture of a horticultural business. So we can start layering on top of these actions. So here we have a field surrounded by the red line. The greenhouses and polytunnels and permanent structures cannot get the SFI payments. So Even though you are producing a large amount of organic product in those, they cannot be claimed on as land for the payment, so that needs to be removed from the total area that you claim for. Now, on this particular example, I'm going to call this a 5 hectare block. I'm not sure how big it is. £707 a hectare. This is £3,535 is the SFI payment for this 5 hectare block of land, which is fine, and it's useful income. However, for example, in this case, surrounded by yellow is this block, which is an agroforestry field. So we can layer on the low density agroforestry payment on top of this. We've then got this area here, which, because we got a horticulture rotation, it's the legume fallow option that Jim was talking about. So 1 hectare of that whole 5 hectares is in the legume fallow for 2 years, building fertility. We've also got this block here because we've had on this an overwinter cover crop. So 1/2 hectare of that, again, we can layer that on a small area because it's not a whole field option. This piece here is known as summer cover crop. I'm no horticulturalist, but for example, if you've had late harvested crops, brassicas or roots that you haven't managed to get lifted or harvested, or you are looking to build to an autumn planting crop, you can actually get paid for having that with a cover crop on it. Interestingly, also, one of the options available to everybody is the no insecticide payment on any permanent cropping, fruit or top fruit, and also on vegetable cropping. So there is a no insecticide payment even for organic farms, but it does require that no insecticidal treatment of any sort is used, even those products such as neem oil, etc., which are permitted in the organic regulations, they're not allowed either. So there is an extra payment available even on top of the horticultural payments. Equally, on every horticultural system, there will be small amounts of grass and margins and edges. For example, and here in the bottom right, we've got a small area of grass that is an awkward little corner. It's always been in grass, so actually you can take that out of management, receive a small payment for that. Equally, around the outside of the field, there's hedges. I've put in a nominal figure of 400 metres. So the hedge management is £13 per 100 metres in order to have the hedge managed, which effectively can involve not trimming. It doesn't have to have active management to get the payment. So the total income we have just on this piece of land coming in is a total of just over £5,030. About £1,000 a hectare more, of £1,000, which is a increase of about £300 a hectare across that whole area of land. So how you see we can manage and mix, bringing little sort of partial options in and slowly build the pot. So we're not just organic, we're actually getting paid for that really positive stuff we do in terms of building fertility, biodiversity, agroforestry, all in as part of the farming system. I've got little points to make about the actions that you have the option of applying for. Some actions are designed as static, so the action is on the whole or part field for the length of the agreement. Example, the bottom left, agroforestry. Obviously, agroforestry is a static option. You can't move it around. But we also have what are known as rotational options, and these, for example, the strips between the agroforestry strips could be in different things, as we've highlighted previously. So you could be into fertility building. You might just be claiming the £45 no insecticide payment. So they rotate, they move around the farm, and you have to report every year what they are when required on a form, which, as Tim said, was a really useful action. However, a change this year compared with previous applications is whatever area you put down in the original application of 26 maximizes the amount that you can get paid. If you put in a smaller area next year, you'll be paid less. whereas in the previous agreements, you could vary the amount of land you put into an action up or down and get paid on the areas. And you can see from a budgetary point of view, it is a little bit of a mess. So this way they have tightened that up. So in the case of when you are putting in the applications, you may have bits of land that don't get paid in some years, but you will be able to keep a fairly consistent cash flow by sort of a little bit of pre-planning. So that's a little bit of the basics. What we need to do perhaps is look at some of these actions we've been talking about, I've been talking about, and what's actually required, because the specifications are quite strict. You do need to comply with these to demonstrate that you have tried to put in what you want, what they've been told to do. So photos of it growing, seed labels to demonstrate that you have bought the seed mix that you claim to have put in. You could be inspected, and despite some of the sort of fairly loose inspections that were being promised 2 years ago, the inspectors are looking to make sure you are doing what you said you would do. So this isn't a sort of a simple, easy way of trying to get away with not doing stuff. So the most useful SFI offer on cover crops is a multi-species winter cover crop. We know all the benefits of overwinter cover crops. We know the way we can use them as weed suppressors. We can use them as nutrient sources and fertility building and organic rotation. Payment rate of 129 covers the cost of the seed and the lack of other potential income. And what is required for this is a multi-species cover mix with at least 2 species from at least 2 plant families. So there is no accidental chance of growing a bean crop by sort of everything else dying off and you end up with an accidental bean crop. This is designed to be terminated at some point. So you need at least 2 species from the brassicas, or at least 2 legumes, or at least 2 series of grasses, such as a westerwold and an oat, for example, or the herb type species, so yarrows and plantains and the like. Overwinter only, so we're not looking at anything that is expected to be long term. This mixture can be grazed if you haven't got a stocklist system, and because one of the concerns is diary dates and doing stuff, and particularly in the organic sector, we haven't got the we obviously haven't got herbicides available to just spray them off and carry on terminating. So we were looking at cultivating green sterile seed beds, weed control strategies. So it can be terminated up to 6 weeks before planting your next crop. So these can be managed the way that you normally would manage the land coming out of an overwinter fertility build period before we start growing crops. This can be a part field option, so we don't have to have the whole field down to this. You can have just a strip or the area or a bed, potentially we're down to very small levels. The other option, which might be considered, again, I've mentioned it previously a little bit, so a summer sown cover crop. Some people I think might use both, so you would follow the one with the other. So you'd have a whole year out of fertility building. 163, again, you've got to have at least 4 species, again, from the 2 plant families. But what is not permitted in this is that sort of pheasant cover crop mix, which has got maize and millet and sorghum and those sort of things. It can't be grazed, does not destroy more than 2 weeks before reseeding. So it gives you that opportunity of terminating, ploughing it in, cultivating it in, disking it in, or whatever is your system, and some weed control prior to planting. So manageable options here that possibly could be used, but in all respects, thinking about what your crops are in the rotation, what cover crop mixes are going to be beneficial, but some can also have a negative effect on crops. So you don't have to have brassicas if you've lots of brassicas in your rotation. And obviously having too much grass mixes in there can lead to weed problems going forward. So selecting the species mixes that's right for this is one of the things to be wary of, but it shouldn't be enough to stop you, because you can select the mix that you want to use. Another one that's, and here we move into the really big paying options, a couple of them. So I'm mentioning them here. How they fit into a horticultural system is difficult. For me, it's not my area of expertise, but I'm raising it. And it's one of these options that may be aware that in the past, some large-scale arable farmers put their whole farm into these mixes and basically took them out of production. So the CAHL1 pollen and nectar flower mix option can only be put on 25% of the area that you claim, or one of a series of 10 that in total add up to 25%. Okay, I don't think we want to do it, but it is one of those things. If you want to have a strip which has got at least 6 flower species, which has to have some of those in them, it ideally wants to go through to the following year, but you can obviously phase it and move it around the plot over time. So it might be something worth considering, particularly on slightly bigger scale options. It obviously has a big benefit in terms of IPM and beneficial insects. The other possible one to think about, again, more on the horticultural side, there is a winter bird food mix with at least 6 seed-bearing crops, which can include biennials if you're doing it for 2 years, such as kale and teasels, which can put down a longish term cover crop bird feeding area. But again, be wary of the weed risk in doing so. Something of interest that I know has been something that has been used and can potentially be used in terms of the fertility building system, flower-rich margins, blocks and in fields, and is the sort of thing that could be done on the edge of a field or in those sort of awkward corners that you're not going to be cropping. So you need at least 4 grass species, but ideally not ryegrass. In fact, not ryegrass is mentioned in the guidance. So would be very much suited for those low-growing fescue type grasses, which fill the space at the bottom to stop weeds getting in. You need at least 10 wildflower species in this mix. So it's quite complex, hence the higher payment, but it's something that may be something of interest. Jim mentioned the legume fallow. So this is an option whereby you do need at least 6 legumes. You can have non-legume flowers in the mix, and you are allowed to have grasses. And again, I would say the fescues, which would fill out the bottom to stop weeds coming in, is possibly something to consider. You cannot graze it. You cannot cut it for forage to take it off the farm, but you can top it for weed control. Can be rotational in the 3-year period, or can be static, so stayed in one place. So rather than the standard, if you like, perennial ryegrass, red clover, fertility building cover crop that's commonly used, this is something that might be worth considering. At 532 a hectare, it's quite a useful payment to get coming in. Integrated pest management, there is a payment for companion crops. I'm not sure I know anyone who has used it in a mixed bed system, but in theory you probably could. But the other one to notice is there's no insecticide payment, which again is a useful option. Lots of details. So as I say, these slides will be available for you, and no doubt there will be questions going forward. Agroforestry can be layered on top of any of these other options we've been talking about. So if you have an area field, if you remember back to the plan I showed you there, where there was a field with agroforestry strips, each strip could be farmed differently, and the agroforestry payments and sits over the top. Agroforestry is not for everybody, particularly on smaller scales, but if you have apple trees, pears, cherries, some people, willow coppicing, even top fruit can fit into the definition of agroforestry. So if you've got 30 to 50 trees per hectare, which is quite low density, there is that 248 payment. Slightly higher density, 50 to 120, which is 120 is more or less the level at which traditional orchards are planted. so you're still possible to farm in amongst that. So it does sort of need to be in rows or grids, but if you have them densely packed to try and squeeze 50 trees into a small patch in a field to claim agroforestry, that would require land use change because it is moving towards woodland, so it isn't allowed. So we need to think about whether it works or not in the way that your farm or holding is set up. For those who have areas of grassland which is separate, not part of the cropping area, there are a couple of options here. Low input grassland, it's £151 a hectare, so it's not an unreasonable amount of money for a bit of that piece of offline grass growing, for example. And there is a payment, £333 a hectare, for actually taking those grassland field corners out of management. They become tussocky, they become sources of food for all the beneficial insects, and so they're useful in that respect. Anyone who has traditional buildings on their holding, there is the payment for heritage, which is a useful little income in order to cover some of the costs of maintaining the buildings. It's not a lot, but every little bit helps in this situation. There's still lots of information. Buffer strips. Again, when you look at your farm, around the edges, around the land, if you leave strips unmanaged on the edges of fields or against watercourses, there is payment for this. Very useful. If you've got ponds on your site, for example, having a strip around the pond could be funded by this. These are some of the options that have been reduced in the most recent version of SFI, but there's a huge amount of stuff that can be brought in, and these little bits and pieces make every part of the farm earning money as well as providing the public goods that we are being paid to do. And the only hedgerow option left now is the managed hedgerows. As I said, it's £13 per 100 metres per side, so it's useful because for most farmers, we're having to spend money on repairing the hedges anyway. So if they're going to pay us to manage them in a certain way, it's a very useful little bit. And these sort of figures soon add up. £13 doesn't sound like much, but you soon get to quite reasonable sums through the managing hedgerow because, particularly on smaller fields, it's a lot more hedges. A couple of other quick options. Some people will not be in SFI because they are in mid-tiers. They're under the, and because of the mid-tier rules, they weren't perhaps allowed to put everything into the organic horticultural option. So some of it's in the OT3 rotational management. One of the options here is the herbal lay payment. It's not available on horticultural land, but it is on rotational land. The requirement is at least 1 grass, 2 legumes, and 2 wildflower herbs. Now, wildflowers or herbs. That's not a herbal lay by anyone's definition, apart from DEFRA's. Multiple species are much better. But in the horticultural sense, fescue grasses to fill out the bottom, 2 legumes, we can have red and white clover, for example. If it's longer term, have lucerne. Look at the trefoils, all really, and vetches, all of which, if they grow naturally on your farm, use them in the mixes. And then the 2 wildflower or herb mixes, really useful crops such as plantains and yarrows and stuff. So they're deeper rooting, so they will help with the soil structure and adding nutrition and fertility as you turn them over. One other option for the arable farmers there is this low input harvested cereal option. There's a slightly reduced seed rate in order to reduce lower head count so that it creates an ideal environment for arable plants to grow, what the conventional guy would call weeds, we call biodiversity. And equally, you can put a flowering companion crop in underneath as an additional within the rules to allow fill out the bottom, prevent the weeds, and increasing that biodiversity benefit. So, options there. Right, I'm going to stop talking about options for a bit and look at what are the next steps for you going forward. If you've got an SBI now, a single business identity number, ensure that you are also able to access the RPA portal where all the field management takes place. There is potentially going to be an opportunity for paper applications, but DEFRA are really trying to move everybody on to an online system. And the online system has been, actually, credit where credit's due, relatively easy to work with. When you're on the portal, make sure your maps are up to date and the land use codes are correct. So remove dung heaps, for example, shown on maps as one person, they couldn't do a whole field option because they still had historically put a dung heap on it. Decide which options that you want to apply for. And my message on this is, what do I do that they pay for? If we're doing for digitally building, tweak your mix to satisfy the requirement to get paid for what I'm already doing. If I was going to make changes to my business, this might be an opportunity to do it. So what do I want to do that's different? Can I get funding to support that change, which will have that public benefit good, but will also help the business? And if I do these things, what effect is this going to have on my system? Because what we don't want to do is bring in something that adds more problems. I mentioned previously these farmers who went in for these non-productive options and gone off on holiday for 3 years. I read an article by an agronomist recently who basically said it was going to take him 5 years to get the farm back weed-free, or to a level of weed that he would consider to be acceptable, because there might be negative consequences of not farming properly. So just think about that in what you do. And then ignore all the other options that you can't consider. It doesn't matter what payment rate are, because they might muck up your system. Cross them off the back of your envelope or wherever you're making your notes, and just concentrate on those that you are doing and can do. A little bit of guideline on the application process. It's an online RPR portal. It is a field by field process. So you go onto each field that you have. Now, if you're small businesses, it's relatively straightforward. For big businesses, obviously, it's a lot more complex. And you have to apply for each action on each individual field. Now, one good thing about the application system is it will not allow you to claim a wrong action. So you cannot claim a horticultural action on a field that's in an arable crop. You cannot claim a stackable option on one that isn't allowed to stack on, because the system will not allow you to do it. And here you can see as an example, again, going back to that guidance thing, you can see the OFC4 and OFM5 and the OT4 options I've highlighted, which shows you that action can be done on the organic horticulture conversion, organic horticultural management, which is OFM5, and the OT4, which is the mid-tier organic horticultural option. So it gives you the guidance to say which actions, and it will demonstrate why you haven't been able to do what you've tried to do. And just a quick reminder about land use codes. For those of you who are used to the system, we were required to annually put in a land use code when we did our BPS forms in May. No longer a requirement to do that, but the data is still might be holding up an application. So check on the RPA what the land use is recorded as and make sure it is what it is. This again comes from the guidance, the land use codes. Click on that to tell you which ones you're allowed to use. And some examples, a mixed arable crop with an AC58, which is the sort of code you'd use for a field that has multiple uses. You can see there's a range of different things here, all the possible land uses. What I recommend you all do now is, as soon as we finish talking, go and start looking at that list of options, read through the notes that come with this, write down each field or each part of the field, what you're going to do on each field or on each parcel. And then when the window opens, it means you'll be in a position to literally transcribe from one piece of paper to the form online. There is backup from the RPA staff when but they are quite big, they will be busy, particularly if you're having IT or computer problems. They are quite good at advising why you aren't getting why it's not letting you do what it is you want to do. What they're not good at and shouldn't really need to do is good at reading your mind about what you're trying to do, and they're not allowed to tell you what options you could apply for. It is your application. Right, so step 5. in a nutshell, an awful lot of talking. Just going to quickly flick through a couple of other options of grants funding you may be aware of. Other supporters, there will be capital grants as well. This will be opening soon. Again, we know one closed suddenly. There is a limited budget again on 4 different things. There's also other grants for various range of other things: protection infrastructure grants, woodland management plan, implementation plans, feasibility studies, facilitation fund, and also for those with a bit more of a research bent, there is also funding available through Adopt. So talk to us if you want more information. And although kind of third higher tier is currently open to invited farms only, we are expecting it to be opened up for other farms to put their own applications in at some point if you want to go to that higher level type scheme. So capital grants, we are going to open in July 2026. One point to bear in mind, you may not want to do SFI or CS, it may not be possible, but you do not to be in mid-tier or SFI to get the capital grants on nearly all of the options. However, if you've had a previous application with unfinished work, that land parcel cannot be claimed for an extra. And equally, the budget's 225 million, so it is first come, first served. Each of the 4 areas has a funding limit. So again, 110,000 is the most a farmer could possibly claim on these range of different actions. And bearing in mind, again, we're talking about government grants here. The payments help fund the work. What they do not do is pay all the costs of the work. So if you do the work yourself, it may well be economically viable. If you pay someone to do fences, for example, it will cost you, but you are getting support towards that cost. So rapidly, because I don't want to spend too much time, if you're looking at agroforestry or orchard planting, there's funding for this and the guard to surround it. Sheep netting around fields, rabbit supplements. So you put a sheep mesh fence around a field, you can actually put a finer mesh wire underneath as well to stop rabbits getting in. The one that a lot of people will be looking for, educational access, is in the capital grants. It's £363 per visit, up to 30 visits, but one of the pre-requirements is you must have a separate SFI or mid-tier agreement or a woodland management agreement, which has got management actions or options. So you can't apply for this without having the SFI. This is one of those that you need to be in the SFI or CS to get. There's also one for assessing woodland conditions. One of the things that we often, and that often comes up on horticultural business is water management. So under the capital grants, there is funding towards above ground water tanks, but to get this option, you do need catchment sensitive farmer officer support for your application. Again, sheep netting, livestock troughs, if you've got small amounts of livestock, putting a trough and running the pipe to it so that the sheep have got water in every paddock is actually a really good way of sort of making your farm more resilient. Air quality stuff, again, supplying plant trees around buildings to try and keep, so particularly if you've got livestock as well, that's where the payment would come for that. And again, as with the SFI, access via the RPA portal, decide what you want to do and where. There is 3 years to do this work. So you prioritize actions which make the job easier, in my mind, is what you would do. Don't do vanity projects, spend the money on what will make your business easier. You will need supporting evidence, which is maps. And if you put in a big application over 50,000, you would actually need to have evidence of funds to go in with the application. One of the complaints that came from DEFRA last year is people were putting in the claims and then not sending in the maps or the evidence and end up being rejected and getting quite cross because they hadn't complied with what was being required from the scheme. Other couple of grants, if you're in FIPL area, so an AOMB, there are money for tree planting, hedge habitat creation, grazing infrastructure and species protection. One other thing which I hadn't put in, and then they have lengthened the application window. So it now closes on the 12th of May. So if you had been thinking about a farming equipment technology grant, minimum of £1,000 and up to 25,000 on the 3 pools, productivity, slurry management, and animal health and welfare. If you are looking at equipment on this, sadly, it must be new. So I know smaller scale businesses are struggling with the cost of new equipment. They're not allowing second hand to be funded through this scheme. If you buy, it cannot be bought using part exchange or on HP, or cannot be something that's already owned in your business and transferring between businesses or whatever. Cannot be an insurance replacement. You are expected to have it on the farm for at least 5 years, but the grant does pay 40 to 50% of either a calculated average price or the actual invoice price. And one of the options, water management, is something under this scheme. Rainwater harvesting, as is shown in the picture here, minimum of 5,000 litres up to £634, so that you can collect rainwater to use it for irrigation and watering. Bigger scale, up to 3,500. Other options, infrared weeders, water pumps, robotic fill and hose, much more expensive, much more capital outlay, may work on some of the bigger businesses. Slurry equipment, I'll put the slide here for you to see later. I'm not going to talk through it because I guess we're not livestock and animal health and welfare. If you have small amounts of livestock, anything from handling systems for cattle and sheep and things like that are useful and make the life work better. Okay. Any questions? I'm going to finish.
Brilliant, Jerry. Thanks so much. There's been a couple of questions in the chat. But before we get to those,
through quickly, so I wasn't able to look at them. So.
No, that's you cover so much ground, and I've watched you do this before, and I now see you tailor it to horticulture. That's brilliant. Excuse me. I've put some links in the chat, so that find funding one's quite useful if you've. And we'll share Jerry's slides, as I say, as a PDF with you, and you can go through. You see those little acronyms. And you can put those in that finder, and that one is particularly for SFI. But then there's also, I've put the that extension of the FETF is in there. And remember, if you can, get your act together as soon as possible. And if you've got any questions, you can ask us. We can always ask Jerry if he's got time to answer stuff over the next few days or so, because time will be short. The budget that they've got is not going to be huge. They want to help us, we think. I will just add before I come to you, Rian, and then I would like to ask Maria if you could just have a reflection from Tolhurst Organic. I chair a group called the UK Fruit and Veg Coalition. We are talking to DEFRA about trying to get something for people who don't meet the 3 hectare limit. It's an ongoing conversation. Again, I feel they want to help. It's whether they're getting their elbows in at the Treasury. So we'll see. So I'll come to Rian if that's okay. And then Maria, if you're ready to just sort of reflect on some of the stuff that Jerry brought up that's particularly relevant to where you are.
Oh, thanks, Stephen. Sorry, my camera's not working. I just had a question, I guess, because this is the first time I've done anything like this, and I did get all our maps ready last year. But I guess, yeah, I'm just a bit confused about how much detail you need to go into on the maps, you know, in terms of like what's a track, is something a hedge, or is it scrubland because it's bramble, like. And yeah, I guess it'd be interesting, Jerry, if you could confirm, like, yeah, if you are doing an action on just part of a field, like, do you have to have marked on your map, you know, what all the different blocks in your veg rotation are, for instance, or is it better and easier to keep things a bit vague?
Jim has probably done it, so he's probably better to answer, but effectively is an area within the field. So if you've got let's say, as we showed in that map I showed earlier, if it's a 5 hectare field and you've got 1 hectare of fertility building, you only put down 1 hectare. You don't have to show which part of the field that's in. And so the land use codes is the important one there. And if you've done the maps and you're registered with the RPA portal, you can then go and mark off, and you might mark off where it's scrub and something like that. I can't remember because it's a long time since I've been on forms. So Jim, you might be able to pick up on that one better than I can.
Yeah, it's just that's spot on. It's just the total figure. I could probably show quite easily the field that I can bring it up.
Yeah, if you want to do a share, I'll okay it or whatever, Jim. And while you're doing that, Rhiannon, you also had another. No, sorry, Benny asked, we're renting an arable field and slowly transferring it into predominantly fruit and veg. What's the process for labeling something as horticulture when it's arable currently?
That would be the land use code on the RPA page. So if you rent the field and you have an SBI number, you through the RPA portal can go to what your field is and you can list it. You can change, you're allowed to change the land use code on those on the RPA portal to say what accurately it is. And so you can change it to a horticultural crop if that's what you want to do.
And just quickly before, while Jim starts screen sharing, Rhiannon said out of management means not mowing. Yes, they're looking for...
Largely speaking, yes, it would be...
It's tussocky grass, isn't it?
Yeah, so when it's grass, you allow it to get... There are some conditions or some guidance notes, but basically... on a larger scale, run an electric fence across that dodgy corner, run an electric fence across it, allow it to get tussocky. If you've got weeds growing, you're allowed to get rid of the weeds. You are allowed to top at various times in the year. Some of the options you can even graze a little bit, but it's basically not mown, not managed, and allowed to become tussocky and that beneficial aspect. So I see it most often on farms where that rough corner, they've never really quite known what to do. They may get paid to leave it for the public that it gives.
Yeah. Thanks, Jerry. Jim, did you want to share that?
Can you see that at the moment, Lee?
Is coming. There it is. Yes.
Yeah, that's just for Rhiannon. That's a field with the ploughed ground in. I think it was spring last year. There's 3 horticultural areas there. The bigger one where I grow field scale type crops, then market garden crops, and a green one with flower crops in. It's just a smaller one. I just grouped them all together in one figure that put on the map. Didn't have to break down. It went into 3 figures, the varieties of different horticultural crops in it. It's just one figure. And if they want, they can check up through what was planted and stuff like that, because it's all there with the Soil Association records.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jim.
Oh, can I just ask a quick question? So,
yes.
Jim, are most of the actions you're doing on that field in the bottom, you've got 3 blue shapes, and are you getting most of your actions, are you doing most of your horticulture on that bottom chunk?
All of it.
Okay.
The 2 bigger fields are in legume fallows, and actually just been talking about the take out of management. That little triangle was bit of field that had sorts of, will I put orchard there? Should we move the flower growing? And really the amount of clearance, the amount of work to bring it into production when we've already got all we need in production at the moment. Yeah, take it out for 3 years, take the small amount. And it does work for public benefits. I can sit outside the house watching the barn owl and the buzzard and the kestrels work it quite hard, and skylarks nesting. So yeah, I'm very happy with that, and a small little bit of money out of that field.
Cool.
Brilliant. Before you know it, Chris Packham will be over with a camera. So Maria, can we just, it'd be really useful because did you say it's 16 acres, Tolhurst
Yeah,
Organic?
it's just about 19 acres, so it's
Okay.
7.5 hectares. Which basically I'll start by saying thank you so much, Jerry, because those were really excellent slides, and I'll try and build off some of that into what I'm about to say. But yeah, 7 hectares, 1.5 hectares, and we at Tolhurst, off that, we get paid about £6,000 a year. So we're probably not maxing out on it, like Jerry suggested, but that is a very, very welcome figure. It's not life-changing, it's not funding a member of staff, but this is the sort of money that we haven't changed, dare I say, very much about how we're managing the landscape. We're finally, for the first time, receiving money for having managed the landscape with these criteria that the government have identified are excellent ways to look after farmland. So we do a lot of the stacking that Jerry talked about. There's various options that which can interlock with one another, be used on the same piece of land. And we basically just sat down, looked at our rotations, where we put our winter cover crops in. Because we've been doing that for years anyway, and this was finally an opportunity to have a look at what we're doing, really clarify the decision making around it, and keep the evidence, keep the essential records, which I suppose we were doing anyway, maybe somewhat informally, maybe somewhat sort of chaotically as well. But yeah, so we sat down, looked at how many weeks things are in winter cover crops for, double check the eligibility for these things. We've got 2 fields, so speaking to sort of Rianne's question about the different cropping areas across different fields, we've got 2 years and 7 sort of little blocks within those 2 fields, so 3 in one, 4 in another. We just take that area or the cropping area, divide it by about 7, taking out a little bit for trackways and stuff. And because our rotation is yearly and these options often pay you for several years, you have a 3-year agreement, let's say. We just take our area, divide it by 7, and the Rural Payments Agency seem absolutely fine with the fact that one year it'll be a little bit more, the next year it'll be a little bit less because our blocks aren't quite perfectly the same. I think there's Jim was talking about how you can sort of you apply for your maximum one, and then in the subsequent years, when it comes to making your declaration, you just say, actually, I've done 1.9 hectares of this, not 2. And that is absolutely fine. That's not punitive. That's not sort of there to catch you out. That is there to, basically pay you the right amount of money for what you're doing.
So just to ask then, because some people have said the mapping has tripped them up, so the RPA remap, you've not had that issue.
No, I mean, in some ways, we'd quite like to remap ours because we're Jim's map that he shared. The blue lines which mark the fields from one another are very close together, which sort of like artificially increases your area. I mean, like, as it should, perfectly. But we've got gaps between our blue lines which demarcate our fields, which, when you're looking at field scale, sort of does decrease the area by a significant amount. So it's worthwhile getting the mapping right. But if you don't, you can change it. It's a bit of a process. If you're struggling with that process, there are people that you can ask. They're pretty friendly with these technical issues and helping you out. I'll also point you in the direction of the Farm Advice Service, which it's free at the point of access. I haven't used it, but I know other farmers who have. And that is a lot of technical sort of information at the fingertips, which DEFRA have pulled various forms of free funded advice, free to the point of contact for farmers. And yeah, they offer it and they take it away and then they change the form and they offer it again in a different way. Brilliant people can advise you. I mean, um, Jerry's just done a fantastic job at basically handing over all of that advice in one nutshell. People are really keen to share their experience, learn from others. Um, but yeah, so going back to the sort of the Tolhurst picture, we probably don't maximize on what we do, but it does leave us a little bit of wriggle room in terms of changing our application in the future. But we do agroforestry. Since we're not on the higher tier countryside stewardship management system, we actually get paid for sort of low or medium density agroforestry, and we absolutely fit the criteria for the higher density. There's places that we can improve, but to be honest, we're not chasing small amounts of money and the headache at the same time, because you spread out your resources according to how you can interact with the system, because it's a little bit complicated. It's not as complicated as it could be, and don't be scared of it, give it a go. But it does take a little bit of wrapping your head around and getting used to their language and their systems and their forms and how they lay out their website. But yeah, no, so we get paid a lesser payment, but one that we qualify for. The higher tier is a very competitive application, and you have to be invited to apply for this round of the funding, but you can also make your own application. There's various hoops that you have to jump through. And as and when we get the resources, we feel comfortable jumping through those hoops to suit us, rather than chasing every single window. Because the payments go up some years, the payments go down some years. We probably benefited by getting some of our payments in the 2024 window because they went up from the 2023 window. And some of the payments in 2025 that we applied for went down. And there's a little bit of calibration that DEFRA seems to be doing year on year to sort of maximise the utility of these schemes. So, I mean, on that note, some of the ones that they're cutting seem to be the ones that are undersubscribed for, or like quite heavily not utilised. So it is your moral imperative to grab this money while it's there, because if nobody takes it up on the offer, they're like, oh, this clearly isn't a sort of a useful thing to fund. Nobody's picking us up on it. So small farm, big farm, whoever you are, the more people apply for this funding, the more secure it is into the future. The utility of it is proven.
Yeah, I think there's a message on what Maria was saying there actually is keep it simple. And I'm not going to put the next word in that one, because it is, don't get too carried away with what you could earn. Make sure that you can stabilize what you definitely can have and keep it straightforward. And if you're worried about getting too complex, don't get too complex. Keep it simple. Just do a small area fertility building using the legume fallow, rather than just I'll call it the traditional ryegrass type clover mixes, or just straight clover. And by keeping it simple, you manage it. It's as soon as you make it complex, then problems start arising. And so I would try to keep it simple.
Simplicity is key for the perpetuity of quite a lot of things. I really agree with that. Yeah, that's great. So we do legume fallows, which could possibly be a winter bird food, because it fits the criteria for these seeding varieties, and it could be a nectar pollen mix if we tweak it a little bit. But to be honest, if we're sticking with what we do and we're trying to get funding for what we already do and what we know and what we're sort of comfortable with our systems and our weed management and the mowing management of everything, we applied for the simplest one, and then we'll see how we sort of follow on with it as well. We do multi-species winter cover crops. There's the possibility for adding in summer cover crops. I wouldn't change our farming rotations in order to facilitate that, in order to receive more funding, just because our farm is more important to us than the volatile nature of when these grants are and aren't available. If we change our rotations to suit this, it may well be that if they pull the funding for it or they reduce it significantly, that it no longer becomes a viable decision for our farm to continue sort of working with it in that way. So it's a great way to facilitate our ethics and how we're land managing, but it's not a great way necessarily to totally upheave what you're doing and, pull the plug under some of your fundamental farming systems in order to receive a grant which may not be there in the future. So for I don't know, it's great if you're wanting to put in a rabbit fence. Excellent, grab the sort of subsidized funding to help you get there. But you will, if you're putting in the rabbit fence because there's the funding, you'll find that you also have to top up that entire grant funding payment system with your own money for a rabbit fence that you sort of could have done without. That's just an example.
Because some of the, I think all of the capital grants are percentages, aren't they? You don't get it all.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So the other thing that we really work well with are the educational access grants, or sort of they come under capital items this coming year, but at the moment they're under the SFI scheme, and that enables us to part-time employ a person to bring school groups onto the farm, which is a fantastic thing to do. We've always wanted to do that. This facilitates us doing it. We've done it before, but informally and sort of it's not been very well funded. This is an excellent way for us to engage with our local community, receive funding for it, and pay another person in our local sort of pool to really grow that as a offering of our farm. And yeah, beetle banks. Here's an example of something that I suppose we changed a little bit. The minimum requirement for a beetle bank on the portal, the details of everything that you apply for, is 2 meters wide, I believe, and ours are about 1.8. All that meant was that we just didn't mow right all the way up to it and increase the area of one. And boom, as far as our record keeping is concerned, we know that everything that we've said that we're doing fits with our record management, fits with our sort of what's in the field, what's on the ground for people to see. But otherwise, diverse farms are, I suppose, hotspots for layering these systems together. Horticulture is quite an intensive land use. So if this can facilitate doing things that sort of look after the soil health really well, but also so organic farming, we're all doing so many of these things anyway. This diversity of what we're providing, how we're using the land can really sort of stack up excellently against what we're being offered money for.
Yeah.
That's about all I've got for
Well, and I think just on that point, so Mick's got his hand up. I'm going to ask Mick if he wants to ask a question, but just to think, everybody, they have talked about an SFI 27. So as Maria's rightly said, grab what you can that you think works for you, because it might help us lobby for that to be funded again next year. Mick, what did you want to say?
Oh, it's just a technical question to Jerry about this registration process. If you haven't done your registration, could you do it and get in the September, or is it the September one as well in terms of registering by the 1st of January?
Good question, Mick. I actually don't know. I picked up that line on something I read this morning, and so I could check for you.
I read that this morning, if that helps. That was it. If you haven't got a single business identifier yet, and you get one within this next little window, you are eligible for the September window and not the June.
Thank you very much.
Result.
There you go.
Well, because a lot of people I know who are in this game, who are small scale, probably wouldn't have gone through that process because there wasn't any benefit from it. So I think that's a big message to get people out there and get in them.
And I would urge you to feed back to the OGA how your experiences are. When we've done this before, DEFRA, RPA people will say, well, what do you mean? What was the problem that person had? So it's quite useful. I can anonymize it. I just need a few case studies to say, and they tried this, they didn't get that, or they got this, and it's really useful. And we will keep on them throughout the next few months. Last questions just in the chat. If a lot of the actions are for 3 years, but you apply this year and you're not, are you allowed to stack compatible actions in future years? How does that work with organic conversion, for instance, being only 2 years?
Right. Okay. Yes. So, to clarification on one of the things, the payments is per year, per action over the 3-year period. You can, as far as we know, you will be allowed to apply for a 2027 agreement if there is one. And I'm going to caveat, so SFI 27 will be a different agreement. You should be able to apply for additional actions which you can layer on top in the same way as at the moment with the Countryside Stewardship Scheme, you can have an SFI on top. And some people will be layering year on year to keep consistent cash flow for the next few years. So, as you mentioned in your question, with organic conversion only being 2 years, you will have to, if you put your conversion in today for an agreement, it will finish in 2 years' time, which will be 2028. So in 2028, you will have to apply for an SFI 28 to get the organic management payments if that option is still available. So you can continue to layer on top as long as you're not being paid for doing the same thing twice and the actions are compatible with what you've already got. So I hope that answers that one.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jerry. And we're going to have to stop there. I like to keep time because everybody's got people that they need to sort out now. It's after 8:30. My thanks to Jerry, to Maria, to Jim, to everybody who came. It's an Organic Growers Alliance webinar, and we're lucky that we've got a lot of people who've got a lot of experience. What we need now is for everybody to pitch in. If you've got questions, you can try us at the OGA and we'll try and find somebody who's got an answer if we haven't. So thanks all. Good luck. Hope it goes well. And we'll share the recording and we'll share Jerry's slides in due course in the next few days if I can get my act together.
Thank you, everyone.